we have two speakers whom I'm delighted to welcome. Polly Longworth is a biographer of Emily Dickinson. She's published work on Emily Dickinson since 1965, some of which are Emily Dickinson, Her Letter to the World, Austen and Mabel, The Amherst Affair, and Love Letters of Austen Dickinson and Mabel Loomis Todd, and a visual biography, Emily Dickinson, Her Letter to the World. There are many things I could say about Polly Longworth, but I'm going to be brief because we're late and their program runs the full time. But let me just add that she's a board member of the Massachusetts Foundation for the Humanities and the American Antiquarian Society, and a trustee of the Martha Dickinson Bianchi Trust, which is the trust that oversees the Dickinson, Austen Dickinson's house, and on the committee for the Emily Dickinson home in Amherst. At present, Polly Longworth is at work on a major biography of Emily Dickinson, which is coming out from W.W. Norton. Doris Abramson is an Emeritus Professor of Theater at the University of Massachusetts. She taught at the university some 35 years. Actually, she taught students and some of the rest of us how to act and how to dress and how to be. She also taught dramatic interpretations of literature that are legendary today. She was a pioneer in scholarship on African American theater, publishing the book Negro Playwrights in American Theater in 1969. And she has just written many, many articles and reviews on the theater. She is the drama editor of the Massachusetts Review, and a poet and a very fine actress herself. Welcome.
I'm going first in this, what Doris and I have begun calling our dog and pony show. I'm sort of the meat and potatoes, and she's the dessert, as you'll discover. When Harold Bloom of Yale University published his much heralded book, The Western Canon, about 2 years ago, he included Emily Dickinson among nearly 24 artists whom he considers the finest writers of prose and poetry in Western civilization. Except for Shakespeare, Bloom asserts, Dickinson manifests more cognitive originality than any other Western poet since Dante. He cites her as the major Western woman poet, saying she has the best mind of all our poets, early and late. What her critics almost always underestimate is her startling intellectual complexity. Imagine saying that about a reclusive woman who lived the quietest life imaginable in her father's house in Amherst from 1830 to 1886. Sometimes, after nearly 40 years of studying this poet, I envision sitting certain 19th century people down. Edward Dickinson, Emily's father, would be one. Austen Dickinson, her brother, would be another. And Thomas Wentworth Higginson, her literary mentor, maybe her minister, and a few Amherst College presidents thrown in. Most of these, mind you, are men, because the people who had some grasp of Dickinson's genius during her lifetime tended to be women. I envision sitting all these people down in straight chairs and then reading them Professor Bloom's remarks, the ones I just read to you. They would look baffled, but Bloom would speak to that. She baffles us, he would say, he does say, by the power of her mind. Dickinson waits for us perpetually up the road from our tardiness, excuse me. Now, Dickinson was an expert in the art of bafflement. She loved riddles. Many of her poems are riddles. Her psychological insights were very shrewd, and her mind was quick. All men say what to me, she told Higginson when he was confused by one of her poems. And even her stern authoritarian father could be nonplussed. Sometimes I say something, and he stares at me in a curious sort of bewilderment, though I speak a thought quite as old as his daughter, she noted with amusement. There she was, witty and brilliant in a time when females were thought to be intellectually inferior. No wonder Dickinson experienced her brilliance as a sense of differentness, one of several differentnesses that set her apart from her friends and her family as she came of age in Amherst during the middle years of the 19th century. The town was just a little rural village, a farming community in the beautiful bucolic Connecticut Valley, and Emily's was the 5th generation of her family to live there. Although Dickinson's had lived in the region since the mid-17th century. In fact, they'd become such a large clan that in lots of the towns in the valley, they outnumbered Smiths. Emily's paternal great-grandfather, Samuel Fowler Dickinson, was a farmer and a lawyer, a Dartmouth graduate and a staunch Calvinist. He was a man of strong moral vision who helped found the 2 institutions that gave Amherst its distinction. These were the Amherst Academy, where Emily Dickinson later received an excellent education, and Amherst College, which was begun to educate pious, indigent young men for the congregational ministry, a ministry that Fowler Dickinson wanted to see spread to the western frontier. Fowler built the family homestead on Main Street, which is what this picture is. And here he and his wife raised their 9 children. The homestead, of course, you can visit today. Emily was born there in 1830 to Fowler's oldest son, Edward Dickinson. Edward became a lawyer like his father, prominent, stern, unsmiling, possessed of a formidable sense of duty. For 40 years, he was treasurer of Amherst College and stood at the heart of every civic enterprise in the town through 5 decades of the century. He served several times in the Massachusetts legislature and for 1 term in Congress prior to the Civil War. So, a man of consequence. Yet Edward has taken considerable abuse from critics of our century for being a bad father to the poet. He's been called humorless, emotionless, narrow-minded, patriarchal, omitting the fact that patriarchal was what men aspired to be in the 19th century. Emily herself viewed him with some trepidation growing up, but in time also with humor and forbearance. By the end of his life, her respect for this remote, emotionally repressed and lonely parent was laced with pathos and a sense of awe. His heart was pure and terrible, she said of him after his death in 1874. I think no other like it exists. Emily's mother, Emily Norcross Dickinson, was, by contrast, meek, timid, rather pretty in early adulthood, decidedly acquiescent, and obsessively absorbed in her housekeeping duties. My mother does not care for thought, the poet once said of Mrs. Dickinson. And in another, more devastating comment, I never had a mother. I suppose a mother is one to whom you hurry when you are troubled. Now, both statements do more than dismiss Mrs. Dickinson's importance. They reveal the extent to which the poet desired to distance herself from this parent, particularly from certain characteristics they shared and that the daughter hated in herself. There's considerable evidence that the anxiety disorder that began to trouble Dickinson as a young woman and that led by the 1860s to her reclusiveness had been a problem for her mother and possibly for her maternal grandmother as well. The essential features of her condition were 3: hypersensitivity to potential rejection, unwillingness to enter into relationships without unusually strong guarantees of uncritical acceptance, and social withdrawal despite a desire for affection and acceptance. This complex of behavior accounts for much that's unusual about the poet: her running from the doorbell, her enlistments of others to address her envelopes, talking to friends from behind a door that has been left just ajar, her refusal to see some close friends who come to call. I do not cross my father's ground to any house or town, she told Higginson firmly, when he insisted that she must come to Boston sometimes because all ladies did. Most of all, we have her shame, the likening of herself to an aspen leaf, to a Bedouin, her apologetic reference to a cowardice of strangers. All this lay at the root of Dickinson's inability to publish, which was one of the central conflicts of her life. Here is Dickinson herself as a 16-year-old in a daguerreotype that was made shortly before she entered Mount Holyoke Female Seminary for the year 1847-48. It's the only camera image we have of her because she disliked the process and disliked the result and declined to be photographed ever again. 15 years later, when Higginson asked her for her picture, she answered, "Could you believe me without? I have no portrait now, but am small like the wren, and my hair is bold like the chestnut burr, and my eyes like the sherry in the glass that the guest leaves. Would this do just as well?" As you can tell, Dickinson loved dissembling. She had a picture, yes, but she hated it and she wouldn't give it to anyone. Her hair was bold, yes, it was red, auburn, something we tend not to think of because we see and imagine this poet in black and white. Her eyes matched her hair, but she wasn't very small, 5'6", which is as tall as I am, which was not short for the 19th century. At the time this was taken, Dickinson had enjoyed a normal 19th century girlhood in Amherst. She was in love with school, always in love with her teachers, precocious, a writer of the wittiest compositions. She had a circle of friends with whom she was very close. She also played the piano and loved flower gardening and even enjoyed cooking, although she hated other forms of housekeeping. "I prefer pestilence," she announced. From the time she was 9 until age 25, the Dickinson family lived not in the family homestead, but in another house on Pleasant Street, next to the town burying ground. This is West Cemetery, which you can visit. Emily and her parents and her grandparents and her sister Vinnie are all buried here. The cemetery inevitably had a vivid hold on Dickinson's psyche and later on her poetry. From the north windows of the Pleasant Street house, Emily could watch some 50 or 60 funerals that took place there every year. Half the burials were babies or children under 17. Some of them were her school friends. Images from her poems suggest she played among the tombstones. Certainly, she played there imaginatively, preoccupied by themes of death and immortality, wondering about the individuals buried beneath the sod, awaiting resurrection. "Ample make this bed," she wrote, "make this bed with awe. In it wait till judgment break, excellent and fair. Be its mattress straight, be its pillow round. Let no sunrise yellow noise interrupt this ground." Dickinson never succumbed to the many religious revivals that occurred in Amherst as she grew up. She never experienced conversion, never formally joined the church as all the members of her family did. Nevertheless, she was steeped as a child in the congregational faith and grew intimately acquainted with the Bible. Along with Shakespeare and her lexicon, which is what she called her Webster Dictionary, the Bible was the largest literary influence in her life. In this church, which some of you will recognize, give or take a pillar, it's at the corner of Route 9 and South Pleasant Street in Amherst, and it now serves as an Amherst College administration building. In this church, for many years, the village meeting house, Dickinson attended 2 services every Sabbath while she was growing up. Much has been made of her later rejection of formal religion, her skepticism of mind and spirit on religious matters, despite seeming to some a deeply religious person and poet. Without any formal public commitment, Dickinson's life work may be said to be her wrestle with the great issues of faith, death, and immortality. She called immortality the flood subject. Now let's introduce some of the other members of her family very quickly. Emily's brother Austin was 2 years her senior. He graduated from Amherst College in 1850 and became a lawyer, and eventually the town's and the college's indispensable man. Emily adored Austin. who was smart, who had a wonderful sense of humor, and who lived his adult life next door to the family homestead with his wife, Susan Gilbert Dickinson, and their 3 children. Their home, called the Evergreens, was a social center of the village, and sometime in the next couple years, it will be open to the public as a museum. Susan was Emily's good friend and a valued critic of some of her poetry. Emily's younger sister was Lavinia Dickinson. She wasn't intellectually gifted like Emily, but she had great comic flair, particularly as a mimic. She was very pretty and had many beaux, whereas Emily was plainer and enjoyed literary friendships with the Amherst students. Neither Vinnie nor Emily ever married, and Vinnie gradually became her sister's great protector. Emily called Vinnie spectacular as Disraeli and sincere as Gladstone. She considered Vinnie standard for superhuman effort erroneously applied. I'd love to turn these slides off, but just pull a veil in front of Vinnie for a few minutes. One of the compelling things about Emily Dickinson that keeps readers and critics and biographers attracted to her, unable to let go after years of study, is the many unanswered mysteries about her life. With all that we know about this poet, there's still much we don't know, because she was reclusive, because she loved riddles, because she wouldn't tell. Why didn't she publish any of her poetry during her lifetime? Why did she wear white? What was the great emotional crisis of the Civil War years that brought on the flood of her poetry? If you claim this poet, or if she claims you, you must learn to feel comfortable with ambivalence, for there are no answers. Dickinson's life is like a black hole, whose properties we interpret by the clues to her universe, into whose center we are drawn by her uncanniness and by her intimate voice. Harold Bloom noted this when he said, "Dickinson waits for us perpetually up the road from our tardiness." Any reader, any writer, enters into an extraordinary engagement with this poet. Acquaintance with her hidden life and her arresting, enigmatic poems very soon become an act of finding, an elusive game played by poet and audience, in which the seeker is drawn deeper and deeper into mystery, at the core of which we discover not Dickinson's identity, for we can never know her, but her inimitable voice. It is a game, and she is it. But instead of running away, we run toward and toward and toward. She remains unfindable, also inexhaustible. 1,776 poems, which one can read over and over and still be astonished to find one's never read before. Critics are left constructing hypotheses about Dickinson's life, and some of their theories have been creative to the point of bizarreness. That she was psychotic, the victim of family sexual abuse, an agoraphobic, a would-be suicide, most notably of all, perhaps, the Madame de Sade of Amherst. The paradox is that many of the bizarre theories can be sustained by citing Dickinson's own words, her own prose and poetry. By extracting herself from her written words, extracting all traces of what she called personality, and by maintaining as well what she called a polar privacy, she left herself open for endless interpretation. Yet in the end, Dickinson remains both whole and unknowable. She allows all interpretations, and she resists all. In the end, it's not the life, but the language that's important. Dickinson's love of words, her awareness of their power, her skill at selecting and packing and drawing the screws tight and tighter to her meaning, was an exercise that began sometime in her 20s, after her return from the year at Mount Holyoke. For several years, she wrote in secrecy, sharing a few poems with her sister-in-law, Sue Dickinson next door, and enjoying some advice from one or two male literary friends she privately called her preceptors, and when they disappeared, relying heavily upon her lexicon for instruction. About 1858, when she was 27, Dickinson began transcribing her best poems into little handmade booklets that we've come to call fascicles. Here's the first of them, fascicle number 1. It's been taken apart and fanned out so that you can see the components that went into a fascicle. These were sheets of notepaper that she folded, so each one was a four-sheet leaflet. And then she stacked them one on top of the other and stitched them along the spine with thread. Eventually, Dickinson entered some 700 of her poems into 40 fascicles. The process may have started as a housekeeping task to cull finished poems from her many worksheets, or Dickinson may have been assembling the little booklets with an eye to eventual publication. We don't know. Some scholars suspect that each fascicle contains intrinsic themes, although no one can agree on what they are. Dorothy Oberhaus has argued most cogently that all 40 fascicles together form a conversion narrative, an intricately structured meditation on a Christian pilgrim poet's progress toward faith, God, and eternity. Whatever Dickinson had in mind when she began, her poetic process exploded with extraordinary force in the fall of 1861, when some enormous, unidentified crisis occurred. It may have been a religious crisis. Possibly it was a thwarted love affair. Some have supposed it had a medical origin, although this is unlikely. She herself termed it a terror I could tell to none, but it provoked an outpouring of such urgency that it is as visible in her handwriting as in the powerful poems that began emerging from her pen. The voice was new, the anguish was new, the urgency and the speed of what began to come can be likened to Sylvia Plath's Ariel poems. It's the best comparison I can think of, a powerful eruption of verse from the very core of the poet. Since many poems of this period seem to be love poems, and because drafts of 3 letters that were addressed to someone called Dear Master were later found among her papers after her death, some Dickinson devotees are convinced that the crisis was one of the heart. And 2 candidates are most often suggested as her possible lover. The first is the Reverend Charles Wadsworth, a prominent Philadelphia minister with whom Dickinson had initiated a correspondence after hearing him preach in 1855. Wadsworth was certainly a very important person in her life, one with whom she discussed religious concerns. She'd later call him my dearest earthly friend and my shepherd from little girlhood. A second candidate, Samuel Bowles, was editor of the Springfield Republican, a wonderful man with a vibrant personality and a close friend of the Dickinsons, with whom Emily also kept up an intimate correspondence. Both these men were recipients of her verses. More importantly, they both went away early in the spring of 1862. Wadsworth took a new church in San Francisco, and Bowles sailed to Europe for his health. Both, in a sense, abandoned her. Just as they departed in April of 1862, Dickinson reached out to a stranger, the Boston man of letters, Thomas Wentworth Higginson, known to her through his books and his essays, particularly an essay that had just appeared that month in the Atlantic Monthly called Letter to a Young Contributor. It offered advice to would-be authors, and Emily used it as her pretext for asking Mr. Higginson's professional advice about her poems. She sent him 4 poems, and it seems from this gesture that her crisis, whatever else and however else it may be construed, was at least in part an artist's crisis. She needed help coping with the great flood of poems, and luckily Higginson responded. Years later, after sending him many, many poems, Emily told him he had saved her life. Now, Higginson has received much criticism for not recognizing Dickinson's genius and insisting that she publish. But oddly enough, what the poet seemed to be asking was Higginson's assurance that she should not publish. She appears to have used him as her shield against requests to publish, and she always kept up the pretext that she was his scholarer, which rather baffled him. Dickinson went on writing poetry until she died in 1886 at age 55 from severe hypertension. But her pace of production slowed after the mid-1860s. Her later years were saddened by the death of her father in 1874 and the death subsequently of a great many people dear to her. Yet she had the pleasure of falling in love in her late 40s with Otis Phillips Lord of Salem, Massachusetts, judge of the state Supreme Court, a friend of her father, and a widower. Drafts of love letters the two exchanged indicate that Dickinson and Judge Lord talked seriously of marriage. But first, her mother's bad health and then Judge Lord's bad health deferred their plans. Even more astonishing than Emily's late romance was Austen's. This pillar of the community fell in love with the winsome young wife of the Amherst College astronomer when she and her husband moved to Amherst in 1881. This is Mabel Loomis Todd, whose 14-year love affair with Austin Dickinson tested the town's moral fiber very thoroughly. It also dramatically affected, for good and for bad, the publication of Dickinson's poetry, for it was the beautiful, talented Mabel to whom Lavinia turned after her sister's death when she found all the poems. Vinnie begged Mabel, who had had some experience in writing, to publish them. With years of work transcribing and editing the mass of materials that Dickinson had left behind, and eventually with Mr. Higginson's help, Mabel did rescue and publish in the 1890s 3 books of Dickinson's poems and 2 volumes of her remarkable letters. But that is a story for another day. I want to end with one last view of Emily, the same view. This is the woman who, although a recluse, managed to participate vividly in the world around her through her reading, through writing, and offering others her poems, through a vast correspondence. This is also the poet who lived her life in her mind. Her tilt with language was brilliant. The scope of her consciousness was broad. After all, she tells us, one need not be a chamber to be haunted. One need not be a house. The brain has corridors surpassing material place. Our self behind ourself, concealed, should startle most. Assassin hid in our apartment be horror's least. Thank you.
As a biographer, Polly Longworth asks the question, who was Emily Dickinson? And she has told us how she's been wrestling with that question, not finding an answer completely. As a reader, my question is, who is Emily Dickinson? And my answer is, Emily Dickinson is her poetry, the eternal present of her poetry. I will be reading some of her poems and bits of her letters. Along with Robert Frost, she's the poet whose name most folks know. We all had to learn something by Emily Dickinson in school. Probably I'm nobody, who are you? And we learned a bit of Frost, too. Emily Dickinson is everywhere these days. For those of you who read the Daily Hampshire Gazette, you would see that in last Friday's Hampshire Life, to introduce a piece about a book group, the Ashfield Ladies Literary Society, there were these lines by Emily Dickinson. There is no frigate like a book to take us lands away, nor any coursers like a page of prancing poetry. This traverse may the poorest take without a press of toll. How frugal is the chariot that bears the human soul. I remember seeing that piece of verse on the wall of the Jones Library when I was a child in Amherst. Of course, growing up in Amherst, I was under the impression that we owned Emily Dickinson. She was a talented neighbor, if you will. After all, her niece, Madame Bianchi, was still living in Amherst, still taking walks. I can see her in her tweed suit with a cane with a pedometer on it, followed just behind by Alfred Leet Hampson, whom we call the woman's home companion. We owned Emily Dickinson, but everyone owns her now. She's on T-shirts, tote bags, pillows, greeting cards, often misspelled Dickinson. On Jeopardy! Famous poet from Amherst, Massachusetts. Answer, who was Emily Dickinson? There's a striking ad for AIDS research with a picture of the AIDS ribbon, which is very much like the ribbon on the picture you saw of Miss Dickinson. And beside the appeal, they have, I'll tell you how the sun rose, a ribbon at a time. I looked for some autumn references, and I found in a letter that Emily Dickinson wrote to her brother Austin in 1851, in the autumn of 1851, these words: I have tried to delay the frosts, I have coaxed the fading flowers, I thought I could detain a few of the crimson leaves until you had smiled upon them. But their companions call them, and they cannot stay away. You will find the blue hills, Austin, with the autumnal shadows silently sleeping on them, and there will be a glory lingering round the day, so you'll know autumn has been here. And the setting sun will tell you if you don't get home till evening. Robert Frost said that a poem is an act, not a report. He spoke of tones, those pauses and rushes and intensities of sound that are more revealing than the dictionary meaning of words. The pauses and rushes and intensities of sound suggested by Emily Dickinson's wonderful dashes are important to anyone reading Dickinson's poems aloud. Those dashes were restored by Thomas Johnson in 1955. I grew up, as some of you here may have, with the poems given their proper commas and periods and question marks by Madame Bianchi and Mrs. Todd and others. Now, when I study the poems to read them aloud, I can never say, oh, well, there's one Emily Dickinson voice. That would be a terrible mistake. I've read somewhere, I can't think who said it, that there was a tone of surprise in her voice. But it would be a terrible mistake to say, well, I must read every poem with a tone of surprise. I have to analyze each one because there is no one all-purpose Dickinson voice, and try to figure out who is speaking. W.H. Auden talked about the guy that inhabits the poem. Try to figure out who is speaking and what is she saying and how does she feel about what she's saying at that moment. So she said herself that she was, in a sense, trying on selves when she was writing her poems. She wrote to Higginson, "When I state myself as the representative of the verse, it does not mean me, but a supposed person." That's very dramatic. That's a dramatic impulse. I'd like to share with you part of the letter that Polly Longworth referred to, that she wrote to Thomas Wentworth Higginson on April 16, 1862. Mr. Higginson, are you too deeply occupied to say if my verse is alive? The mind is so near itself, it cannot see distinctly, and I have none to ask. Should you think it breathed, and had you the leisure to tell me, I should feel quick gratitude. If I make the mistake, that you dared to tell me would give me sincerer honor toward you. I enclosed my name, asking you, if you please, sir, to tell me what is true, that you will not betray me. It is needless to ask, since honor is its own pawn. She enclosed her name written in pencil on a little card. When she wrote to Thomas Wentworth Higginson to ask him if her way of writing poems seemed valid to him, a professional critic, Emily Dickinson had already written some 300 poems, including It's All I Have to Bring Today, This and My Heart Beside, This and My Heart and All the Fields and All the Meadows Wide. Be sure you count, should I forget, someone the sum could tell. This and my heart and all the bees which in the clover dwell. And also, success is counted sweetest by those who ne'er succeed. To comprehend the nectar requires sorest need. Not one of all the purple host who took the flag today can tell the definition so clear of victory as he, defeated, dying, on whose forbidden ear the distant strains of triumph burst agonized and clear. And from a letter. But first, about the person who's receiving this bit from a letter. Helen Hunt Jackson, another writer whom you know, was a contemporary of Emily Dickinson, born the same year that she was born. And she moved out to Colorado. When Helen Hunt Jackson died of cancer on August 12, 1885, her husband received this note from Emily Dickinson. Helen of Troy will die, but Helen of Colorado never. Dear friend, can you walk? Were the last words I wrote her. Dear friend, I can fly, her immortal reply. Imagine receiving a note from Emily Dickinson, or a letter from Emily Dickinson. When Higginson went to South Carolina in command of a Negro regiment in November of 1862, he received a letter from Emily Dickinson, part of which I will read to you, that February 1863. I garbled that approach, but anyway. This is the February 1863 letter, part of it. Dear friend, perhaps death gave me awe for friends, striking sharp and early, for I held them since in a brittle love of more alarm than peace. I trust you may pass the limit of war, and though not reared to prayer, when service is held in church for our arms, I include yourself. I was thinking today, as I noticed that the supernatural was only the natural disclosed, not revelation 'tis that waits, but our unfurnished eyes. But I fear I detain you. Should you, before this reaches you, experience immortality, who will inform me of the exchange? Could you with honor avoid death, I entreat you, sir, it would bereave your gnome. This one time she signed herself your gnome. I'm not sure we know why. In a letter written to her cousins, her Norcross cousins, in 1863, she wrote the following about the death of a friend's mother. Jenny Hitchcock's mother was buried yesterday, so there is one orphan more, and her father is very sick besides. My father and mother went to the service, and mother said while the minister prayed, a hen with her chickens came up and tried to fly into the window. I suppose the dead lady used to feed them, and they wanted to bid her goodbye. Life is death we're lengthy at, death the hinge to life. Love from all, Emily. And now to the poems. Many of them will have as their subject death. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. The carriage held but just ourselves and immortality. We slowly drove. He knew no haste, and I had put away my labor and my leisure too for his civility. We passed the school where children strove at recess in the ring. We passed the fields of gazing grain. We passed the setting sun. Or rather, he passed us. The dews drew quivering and chill, for only gossamer my gown, my tippet only tulle. We passed before a house that seemed a swelling of the ground. The roof was scarcely visible, the cornice in the ground. Since then, 'tis centuries, and yet feels shorter than the day I first surmised the horses' heads were towards eternity. And then one that is very interesting when you start to analyze it and realize that who is speaking is someone who has already died. I heard a fly buzz when I died. The stillness in the room was like the stillness in the air between the heaves of storm. The eyes around had wrung them dry, and breaths were gathering firm for that last onset when the king be witnessed in the room. I willed my keepsakes, signed away what portion of me be assignable, and then it was there interposed a fly with blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz between the light and me. And then the windows failed, and then I could not see to see. I never felt at home below, and in the handsome skies I shall not feel at home, I know. I don't like paradise, because it's Sunday all the time, and recess never comes, and Eden will be so lonesome bright Wednesday afternoons. If God could make a visit, so not to see us, or ever took a nap, so not to see us, but they say himself a telescope perennial beholds us, myself would run away from him and Holy Ghost and all. But there's the judgment day. Particular favorite of mine, this one. What is paradise? Who live there? Are they farmers? Do they hoe? Do they know that this is Amherst and that I am coming too? Do they wear new shoes in Eden? Is it always pleasant there? Won't they scold us when we're homesick or tell God how cross we are? You're sure there's such a person as a father in the sky. So if I get lost there ever, or do what the nurse calls die, I shan't walk the jasper barefoot. Ransomed folks won't laugh at me. Maybe Eden ain't so lonesome as New England used to be. Here's an Amherst poem. It really is a report from her house looking across the street. There's been a death in the opposite house as lately as today. I know it by the numb look such houses have always. The neighbors rustle in and out. The doctor drives away. A window opens like a pod, abrupt, mechanically. Somebody flings a mattress out. The children hurry by. They wonder if it died on that. I used to when a boy. The minister goes stiffly in, as if the house were his, and he owned all the mourners now, and little boys besides. And then the milliner, and the man of the appalling trade, to take the measure of the house. There'll be that dark parade of tassels and of coaches soon. It's easy as a sign, the intuition of the news in just a country town. That country town, Amherst. In the spring of 1876, she wrote in a letter to Higginson, "My earliest friend wrote me the week before he died, 'If I live, I will go to Amherst. If I die, I certainly will.'" I went to school with a boy named Francis Strange, Franny Strange, and he wrote from the Philippines, where he was stationed in 1944, these words: "I often picture my old hometown in my mind as the most beautiful place in the world. I guess my heart is in Amherst, and there is no getting away from it. I want it there because it is my one and only paradise." Should have one love poem. Heart, we will forget him, you and I, tonight. You may forget the warmth he gave. I will forget the light. When you have done, pray tell me that I may straight begin. Haste, lest while you're lagging, I remember him. And then, because you can all say it with me, aloud or in your heads, I'm nobody. Who are you? Are you nobody too? Then there's a pair of us. Don't tell, they'd advertise, you know. How dreary to be somebody. How public, like a frog, to tell one's name the livelong June to an admiring bog. And because I know that this is one of Polly's favorites, I'll read it. if I shouldn't be alive when the robins come, give the one in red cravat a memorial crumb. If I couldn't thank you, being fast asleep, you will know I'm trying with my granite lip. I reason earth is short, and anguish absolute, and many hurt. But what of that? I reason we could die. The best vitality cannot excel decay. But what of that? I reason that in heaven somehow it will be even, some new equation given. But what of that? Will there really be a morning? Is there such a thing as day? Could I see it from the mountains if I were as tall as they? Has it feet like water lilies? Has it feathers like a bird? Is it brought from famous countries of which I have never heard? Oh, some scholar, oh, some sailor, oh, some wise man from the skies, please to tell a little pilgrim where the place called morning lies. And finally, a word is dead when it is said, some say. I say it just begins to live that day.